Good morning and a very warm welcome to you all. Now we've gathered to celebrate the life of a very special lady, Patricia Joan Hartley. We're here to remember Pat and to give thanks for her life. Pat was special to all, so precious, so admired, so full of humour and quite irreplaceable. Today you've all come together from different places and some of you have travelled quite a distance to be here. You're each at different stages on your own journey through life. And even though you may not all know each other, there's one thing that you all have in common. At one point or another, and to some degree or other, Pat touched your life and you touched hers. Now, from all that's been said about Pat, I know that hers is a life that truly deserves to be celebrated. And that's why we're here today, to celebrate her long, full and very happy life. But whilst you're sad to say goodbye to her, you'll also have memories of the laughter, the good times, the quiet times, and the love and happiness Pat brought to your life. I'm Joy Atkinson, a funeral celebrant, and I've been asked to lead today's ceremony in memory of Pat. Now, Pat was born in Birkenhead on the 13th of August 1931, and she was the second of three children born to Patricia and Robert Hartley. With the onset of war, Pat was evacuated from Birkenhead to Towyn with her elder brother Robert and her little sister Audrey. Their mum had made Robert promise to look after his sisters, and he took this very seriously and refused to let anyone separate them. But at Towyn, nobody wanted to take three children, and the policeman who'd been driving them around all day trying to find them a billet was despairing by nightfall. He eventually took them to his own house, just for the night. However, his wife really took to the children and persuaded him to let them stay. They were very kind, and the children stayed there for about 2 or 3 years. Pat herself remembered Audrey and I were evacuated a second time when Birkenhead began to be bombed, this time to Derwent Cottage in Kilken. My parents knew William Davis, who lived there with his wife Hannah, as he worked in Birkenhead looking after the horses used by British Rail. My parents paid a sum to Mr. and Mrs. Davis to look after us. We went to the local school and also to Capelgad and learned Welsh verses each week for Sunday school. We loved the open countryside around Kilken and have made many happy memories of playing outdoors. Pat was an outgoing child who enjoyed the outdoors, especially cycling, and she learned to drive as soon as she could. These pleasures stayed with her all her life. She joined Liverpool City Police and drove a black Mariah. She was also in the St John's ambulance. Pat met her future husband through the family she'd been billeted with. She kept in touch with the folk from Derwent Cottage and in the early 1950s drove back to Kilken to see Auntie Nan. Eventually, in 1960s, she married Auntie Nan's nephew, John. She took her stepchildren back to Kilken many times, spending happy holidays, staying in the little wooden chalet that John's family owned. Her love of North Wales never left her, and she chose to live in nearby Harden. Pat's step-grandson Steve will now share some of his thoughts and memories.
Pat, joy, full of life, woman of action. These were just some of the words that my siblings shared with me when I was preparing these thoughts and memories of Auntie Pat. As we've heard, she was a policewoman and then an ambulance driver, and she took great pride in her police training as a speed driver. wonder how many of you knew that. She was my grandfather's second wife. We knew very little about her early life, but did know she'd been a child evacuee from Birkenhead to Kilkin, and this was my mother's family's hometown. But she had done much, much more that we probably never knew about. Pat returned to Birkenhead after the war, but she maintained her links with Kilkin. Not sure how she got to know my grandfather, but I can't say my mother reacted with joy at hearing my grandfather was marrying so soon after my granny's death to someone who was so much younger. It might have been John Stevens' strong Welsh lyric tenor voice. He was well known for breaking into love ballads when ordering a pint at the Parrot, his local pub. However, I do recall Pat becoming quite agitated once when they came to visit us in Formby. We went to the local pub and he started singing to the barmaid, "Oh, John, shut up, you're always embarrassing me." I recall Brian, my mother's brother, calling to break the news about the impending marriage, saying, "Well, look at it this way, Pam. At least we don't have to look after him." "Would you have liked looking after him?" "I know I wouldn't," he said. However, it wasn't long before my mother and the whole family became very close to Pat, and she became part of our family. Life wasn't plain sailing, and by the 1980s, Pat was the full-time carer for her mother and for John Stephen. They weren't easy. Both, now octogenarians, argued and bickered constantly, something that maybe Rob and Betty will recall being the neighbours. My grandfather had by then retired from his many years working as a security guard at Broughton Aerospace Factory. I don't remember him catching any intruders, but I do recall him tapping his smart peak cap to passing bigwigs and spending the rest of the time in his security guard's cabin drawing dogs. And that was a love they did share, Sammy, their dog, which I recall, I'm sure my siblings do too. He became an important part of their lives and the subject of copious sketches. After John Stephen took up gardening, I also recall neat rows of cabbages and lettuces in their small back garden in Drury. But the two old people in the house were too much, and soon we heard that Grandpa had been dispatched with his packed sandwich box and thermos of tea, at least we thought it was tea, to a local working men's club, where he was the commissioner at the door, a job he loved, and which he continued to do well into his 80s. Some of you may have been to her bungalow in Drury and seen her part bedroom in the attic. It was her bolt hole to escape into her own safe space after the care duties of her two elderly dependents. And I'm fairly sure it was a conversion she did herself. She was incredibly practical and made many things. Our garden gates at Ryeground Lane in Formby were her own craftsmanship, and the bird table she made many years ago has only recently collapsed. Many bird boxes she made it over her life, and I think many members of the family still have her bird boxes. She could put her hands to most things. A few years ago, we were visiting Kilkin with Pat and walking round the old haunts. We found ourselves in the old village school, now a lovely community centre. That day, there was a celebration of the arts and crafts of the village, and we sat at the low school tables eating scones and having lovely cups of tea. It did seem idyllic. "This is such a lovely place, isn't it, Pat?" I said. "It makes great use of the old school where my mother used to go." "I came here too," said Pat, "when we were evacuated from Birkenhead." But I don't have such happy memories. Why not, I asked. Well, we were not Welsh-speaking, and that immediately marked us out as outsiders. The other children were never very nice to us. Mid-morning, the whole class were given a mug of hot bovril. Oh, I loved the taste of hot bovril. Well, quite a few times, the other children would mischievously replace Audrey and my mug with hot gravy browning. Yuck. I know it seems funny now, but when we were kids, it was a real kick in the teeth. A key theme of her life has been love and care for animals. This is reflected in her last will and testament, with the donations of most of her estate to various animal charities. Her love and care for badgers goes back decades, and her life in the police force was clearly of help in helping her track down badger baiters. Long before the more recent culling of badgers, Pat was engaged in finding badger sets and then organising badger watchers to protect the sets from dreadful sports badger baiting. I do recall her appearing in court a few times to give witness evidence in the prosecution of gangs of men with dogs accused of tearing badgers apart. It was a ruthless sport. It was only recently that her activities with the North Wales Badger Society became almost impossible. Her hugely restricted eyesight and her increasing immobility from back and hip pain made it impossible. Any distance my mother felt from her stepmother, no, she's not my stepmother, call her auntie, dissipated over time, with her always known to us as fondly as Auntie Pat. And this relationship was built when Pat acquired, through relatives of John Stephen, a small cabin, chalet, in the Fron, on the hillside below Morvanna. She restored this broken-down shepherd's retreat with stunning views of the hillside, flocks of sheep, and a distant babbling brook. She made it wind and waterproof. It did not have right of access for vehicles, so restoring the hut was very difficult and took many years, but it wasn't an obstacle to Pat. The green cabin became a natural part of our family holidays in the 60s, 70s and 80s. Many precious moments were spent there. I know it rained from time to time, but our memory is always of sunny, warm days. Pat making tea and sandwiches for lunch as we came back to the cabin after testing our shoes in the babbling brook. I do recall the Elsan loo, and that was something of a challenge. The field where the cabin was did not belong to Pat. In fact, neither did she own the cabin, but she paid a symbolic rent to the Rushforth sisters. After the sisters died, Pat was offered the opportunity to buy the cabin and the small field it was in, but she couldn't get the cash together. So she appealed to us to buy it amongst us. At that time, it wasn't an opportunity we could grab, but much do we regret it now. Sadly, the energy, love, and considerable ability put into restoring the cabin was all lost in the early 2000s, when the property was bought by a Welsh expat family seeking a holiday cottage. They apparently pulled down the cabin and built something more permanent, but without seeking planning permission. So finally, the authorities caught up, and the development and the structure were demolished. All very sad that a part of Pat's rich life died with that cabin. But never caught without things to occupy her. When not chasing and catching badger baiters, Pat took up sailing. I recall my brother raising her eyes to heaven and saying, "Pat, whatever for?" But Pat loved a challenge and loved nature. I am told that she never learned to swim. When she finally gave up sailing because of the increasing time she devoted to both the Badger Society and her failing eyesight, she sold it to one of my nephews, and they kindled his love for sailing. That kindled his love for sailing. In her final weeks in hospital, after suffering months of immobility and pain, Pat found it difficult to focus on anything more than her acute discomfort and expressed her wish to die as soon as possible. However, there were moments when we were able to distract her from her anxiety and remember good and happier moments. She remembered all my siblings by name and indeed many of their children, and particularly Ben, who had got the yacht, the little dinghy that she used to sail. She recalled Anna, my niece, singing in Welsh on the day we distributed my mum's ashes in the babbling hillside brook in Kilken. And she said to me, "That will always be a precious day for me." So Pat, you may not have known how much we appreciated you, and we definitely failed to visit you as much as we should, something we will now regret. But we will always remember you with a smile and the beautiful times you helped create in our childhood.
Thank you. Pat went on to become a much-loved aunt and great-aunt and enjoyed their visits. Most recently, Pat enjoyed a drive around reminiscing Birkenhead and Liverpool with her brother-in-law Arthur and her niece and nephew Debbie and Brian, and was delighted to revisit many of her old haunts, recalling happy times. Great-nephew Richard spent many happy holidays in Wales with Pat, and he remembered, when I was about 12, we clambered up Movamo with Grandma, looking out across the hills, her wearing her trademark tinted glasses. She said, "When you're older, remember your great-aunt Pat, G-A-P for short." She was henceforth known to me as Gap. Friend and neighbour of many years, Betty will now share some of her memories.
My husband Bob and I have known Pat as a friend and neighbour for many years, for more than 40 years. When we first knew her, she lived with her husband, John Stephen Jones, a good few years older than Pat, and her mother Patricia. They all had a great sense of humour and a love of music. John filled the room with his presence and was always ready with a song. He worked all his life, right up until the end. Pat loved going out, and when she was given the use of a chalet in a beautiful location near Kilken, on the way back to Movamo, she took on quite a task. A tree had fallen across the roof of the chalet, but she tackled that job and many others to make the chalet into an exciting refuge for her friends and family. Our young children, Suzanne, John and Jackie, loved going to the chalet, as well as enjoying Pat's company. It was here that she taught me to swing over gates, which her beloved brother Bob had taught her, learned during his exciting army days. Suzanne remembers her New Year's parties at the chalet after nearly being blown off Movamo. Pat enjoyed her brief venture into sailing when we had an old-fashioned heron dinghy, which we sailed down at Shottock, and till our last venture when the strong wind overturned us. The boat filled to the gunwales with water, and Pat desperately flailed in the waves, until she realised It was only 4 feet deep. We had a good laugh and decided to sell the harem, much to the disappointment of John, who thought a lot of Pat and enjoyed coming out with us. Suzanne and Jackie also relished her company and found her far less boring than Mum and Dad. Pat also loved the mountains of North Wales, and on a mystery tour we drove into sight of Tryfan, and Pat remarked about its lovely shape. So we all climbed it, John and Jackie in backpacks on our pockets, with little Suzanne in tow, pausing only at the steep summit slope, spree slope, before scrambling to the top. One of Pat's hobbies was woodwork, and on one special occasion, when we really had snow in the winter, she built a magnificent sledge for our children, and we all had tremendous fun. It lasted a long time. I had the honour of meeting a remarkable lady, Kitty Hart Moxon, a survivor of the Holocaust, who arranged for Pat and me to visit the Holocaust Memorial Centre near Laxton in Nottinghamshire. As you will know from the name of the bungalow, Shalom, Pat had Jewish sympathies, and we both enjoyed a very special time at this beautiful and moving place, such a contrast to Nazi barbarity, where Kitty had lost so many of her friends in Auschwitz. Pat is probably best known as the central contact for Clwyd Badger Group and for her work with Olwyn, Carol and Julie on the newsletter. Carrying the Badger Group phone number in her house right up until the end was a dedicated and courageous thing to do, when the callers could ring day and night about problems. She also had to deal patiently with many complaints about badgers digging in gardens. The English and Welsh badger groups had meetings once a year, and the Dutch group, Das en Boom, was included when a magnificent man named Jaap, he was about 6 foot tall, 6 foot plus, and he befriended Pat in particular, to such an extent that she later went over to Holland to see what they were doing there. So with that in mind, any donations in memory of Pat here will go to Clwyd Badger Group. Oh, sorry. Pat was CBG's constant presence at many summer shows we attended during the years. She liaised with a network of contacts in the badger world, such as Secret World, Badger Trust, other badger groups, and many allied individuals, as well as dealing with officials on planning matters involving badgers. She attended site meetings, carried out surveys, and attended work parties. There is no doubt that the work that she carried out on behalf of badgers alone and with others improved and saved the lives of many badgers. Towards the end, she seemed to appreciate all her badger group friends, as well as Margaret Ludden, a special friend, who helped Pat so much with large print books when Pat was losing her sight. And nobody did more to help her than her friends, Carol Schoen and Olwyn Fitzmaurice, during the last months of her life. Her distant relatives were most supportive and immediately came to see what they could do to help. Pat, of course, outlived all her close relatives. Pat's love of animals, as well as her great respect for the work of the Smith family at the Holocaust Memorial Centre, is reflected in her will.
Now, Bob and Betty's son John has shared some of his memories. Pat was an amazing neighbour to have had when I was growing up, not least because of the chalet at the foot of Movama near Kilken. This was a magical place for a child. Very simple, made out of corrugated iron with an outside portaloo. But she painted it and removed a fallen tree from the roof and made it homely. We'd climb Movama at New Year before it was fashionable, and then scramble down in the dark to the chalet, light the fire, read her Beano and Dandy comics, and then sleep in the bunk beds. Then we'd play in the stream at the bottom of the field the next day. Even her house was fun for a child. She'd put a little room in the loft, but you had to climb a steep ladder to get to it. It was fun going with her sailing on Shottock Lake, even when we capsized. I'll always remember her as a kind-hearted, funny, adventurous, slightly mischievous lady, and she had a very warm, pleasant voice. She said she would go to Kilken every year on JS's birthday and pour a pint over his grave. I think that sums up her eccentric spirit. Now, the celebration of Pat's life will continue at the Celtic Arms, where you're all invited to join the family to share some of your memories and to raise a glass to Pat. Now, before we say farewell to Pat, spend a few moments now with your own memories. We now come to the time to say farewell to Pat. Please stand if able. With love and appreciation, we commit the body of Patricia Joan Hartley to its end with nature. Say farewell with sadness, but let your grief be softened by your unique memories of Pat's friendliness, her kindness, and her bubbly personality. Pat, we let you go into the freedom of wind and sunshine. We let you go into the dance of the stars and the planets. We let you go into the earth's cycle of living and dying. May the light of peace, love, and understanding be with you always. Pat, with sorrow we say farewell, and with love we leave you in peace. Please be seated. Please join, if you wish, in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pat's friend Carol will now share a couple of well-chosen poems.
I've chosen two poems by Mersey poet Brian Patterson for two reasons. Firstly, Pat was a Merseysider through and through. Secondly, with reference to the first poem, it was Pat's steadfast belief that the whole of nature is entitled to due accord and active attention. In Tintagel graveyard, who brought the flowers to this grave? I, said the wren. I brought them as seeds and then watched them grow. No, said the wind, that's not true. I blew them across moor and sea. I blew them to the grave's door. They were a gift from me. They came of their own accord, said the celandine. I know best, they're brothers of mine. I am death's friend, said the crow. I ought to know. I dropped them into the shadow of the leaning stone. I brought the flowers. No, said love, it was I who brought them. With the help of the wren's wing, with the help of the wind's breath, with the help of the celandine and the crow, it was I who brought them for the living and the dead to share. I was the force that put those flowers there. And this is part of the poet's narrative, the second poem. The sound of the ship's foghorns on the Mersey and the rattle of freight trains passing through the darkness were the lullabies of my childhood. On winter nights especially, I would lay curled up in the bed chair, listening to the laments of the liners and the cargo boats. It was a laborious music, muffled by the drizzle and kept afloat by the fog that hung over the city. It was those mournful sounds that set the imagination soaring. I was snuggled up in one of those boats. Above me, the deck would be covered in sea fret, and I was on my way to elsewhere. Pipe a dream. If I could choose the hour in which death chooses me, and the way in which it will make its arbitrary choice, I can think of nothing better than to fall asleep near midnight in a boat as it enters a new port, in a boat with a clarity of stars above and below it, and all around me bright music and voices singing in a language not known to me. I'd like to go that way, tired and glad, with all my future before me, hungry still for the fat and visible globe.
Thank you. Now, as you say your own farewell to Pat, it's worth remembering that the people we lose live on through us. And everything we do or say is shaped by what we've absorbed from them. Now, picture a moment now when you and Pat laughed together. Think of one thing she taught you or showed you. Remember a chat that you once had. Now, these memories are the legacy of love. That we absorb these moments and we can replay them whenever we like means the ones we lose are never far from us. None of us can stay on this earth forever, but the strength of human connection, love, is what means we remain in the hearts of others long after we're gone. So when you think of Pat, both today and in the future, try to recall a special personal memory and appreciate how much richer your life is for having known her. But most of all, try to recall a memory that makes you smile. We bring Pat's ceremony to a close with the words of singer and author Maya Angelou. My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humour and some style. which is exactly how Pat lived her life. Many of you will meet together after this ceremony, and beyond that, you'll remember Pat in your own way, with your own memories, and the life that you've come here to remember and celebrate today will have a real and lasting influence on your own life. On behalf of everyone who knew and loved Pat, thank you so much for being here with us today.